My fiancé demands I give his brother and his wife my inheritance that my mom left for me so he can have a child. All right, so here's the deal. I'm 32, female, and I recently lost my mom. She was my only parent, and to say I was devastated doesn't even begin to cover it. I feel like I've been hit by a truck, like there's this huge hole in my chest, and honestly, I don't know how I'm supposed to fill it. Grief is weird, you know? Some days I can get by okay, and then others, it feels like everything is falling apart. Anyway, when my mom passed, she left me a little bit of money. It's not like some giant windfall or anything. It's more like a small safety net. My mom didn't come from money, and her family wasn't well off either, but I guess she saved what she could for me. I'm still figuring out what to do with it. Like, part of me wants to just hold on to it because it feels like it's the last thing she gave me, you know? At first, when I told my fiancé, Jake, about it, he was super supportive. He was like, "Babe, you deserve this. It's your mom's money, and you should do whatever you want with it." That really made me feel good, especially because I'm still struggling with losing her. I thought he understood that this money was tied to something much bigger than just numbers in a bank account. It's tied to her memory, to everything she meant to me. I wasn't in any rush to spend the money. I mean, yeah, I have some student loans and stuff I could pay off, but it just didn't feel right to touch it yet. Like, I need time to figure out how to honor my mom with it, not just throw it at random bills. I was still in that place, just trying to grieve and process everything. But then, things started to change. Jake told his family about the inheritance. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, we're engaged, right? So it's not like it's weird for him to tell them stuff that's going on in our lives. But looking back, I kind of wish he hadn't said anything because that's when the weird comments started. Jake's brother, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, have been trying to have kids for a while, but they've had some fertility issues. Mark, I guess, can't have kids naturally, and they've been looking into IVF. I always felt for them because it must be hard to want kids so badly and not be able to have them. But at the same time, it's not something I was directly involved in. Like, it's their issue, not mine. So after Jake tells his family about the inheritance, he starts bringing up Mark and Sarah more and more. At first, it's just little comments like, "It's such a shame they're having a hard time," or "I really hope they can figure something out." I didn't think much of it because, yeah, it sucks for them, and I figured he was just venting or whatever. But then one day, Jake made a comment that caught me off guard. We were sitting at the kitchen table and he says something like, "You know, if they could afford IVF, they'd finally be able to have a baby." I nodded, kind of absent-mindedly, not realizing where this was going. But then he adds, "It's too bad they don't have the money for it." At that point, I paused. It was clear where this was heading, but I didn't want to assume the worst. So I just kind of waited for him to say more. And sure enough, he did. "You know, with the money from your mom's inheritance, you could help them out," Jake said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He said it so casually, like he wasn't asking for much at all. I just sat there, staring at him for a minute. I didn't even know what to say. I mean, was he seriously suggesting that I take the money my mom left me and give it to his brother and sister-in-law for their IVF treatments? That's a huge deal, right? It's not like he was asking me to lend them $20 or something. "I don't think that's what I want to do with it," I finally said, trying to be polite but firm. I didn't want to cause a fight, but I also wanted to make it clear that this wasn't happening. Jake looked surprised, almost like he hadn't considered that I might say no. "But they need help," he said, like that was supposed to change my mind. "It's the only way they can have a family." Now look, I get that they're struggling, and I really do feel for them. But at the same time, this is my mom's money. It's not just some random sum of cash lying around for people to dip into whenever they feel like it. It's something she worked hard for, and I'm the one she left it to. It's not something I want to just give away because someone else is having a tough time, even if they're family. "I'm really sorry they're going through this," I told Jake, trying to keep the peace. "But I just don't feel comfortable using my mom's money for that. I need to figure out what I want to do with it first." Jake didn't say much after that, but I could tell he wasn't happy. The whole conversation just left a weird feeling in the air. I went to bed that night, thinking about everything, but I still felt like I made the right decision. This money was tied to my mom, and I wasn't going to let anyone pressure me into doing something I didn't want to do with it. The next day, Jake was still quiet, and I could tell he was stewing about it. He didn't bring it up again, but something about his mood just felt off. I figured maybe he needed time to cool down and realized that what he asked me was kind of a big deal. But deep down, I had this gut feeling that this wasn't the end of the conversation. And I was right. So after that whole conversation with Jake about the inheritance, I really thought we were done with it. Like, okay, I said no, he didn't like it, but we could move on, right? Apparently not. The next few days were weird, like really weird. Jake was being super quiet around the house. You know when someone's not saying anything, but you can just feel that they're mad. It was like that. He'd walk around with this tense vibe, barely talking to me, and when he did, it was just one-word answers. At first, I thought he just needed some time to get over it. I mean, I get it. He's close with his brother, and it sucks for Mark and Sarah that they can't have kids. But like, I'm not responsible for fixing that. Still, I wanted to give Jake space, hoping he'd come around on his own. I figured if we didn't talk about it for a few days, he'd realize how unreasonable his ask was, and we could move forward. But oh no, that's not what happened. Instead, Jake doubled down. He didn't bring it up directly again, but he started making these passive-aggressive comments, like he was trying to guilt me into changing my mind. We'd be watching TV or eating dinner, and he'd say stuff like, "You know, Mark and Sarah are looking into adoption now. It's their last option since they can't afford IVF." And then he'd just look at me, waiting for me to react. I mean, what was I supposed to say to that? It's not like I suddenly had a change of heart. After about the third time he pulled this, I had to say something. So I looked at him and said, "Jake, we already talked about this. I told you how I feel about the money. Why are you still bringing it up?" He shrugged, like it was no big deal, and said, "I just think it's sad, that's all. They'd be such great parents, but they'll never get the chance." That was it. That's when I started getting pissed off. I mean, seriously? I know I'm not the bad guy here, but the way he kept framing it made me feel like I was. Like I was the reason they wouldn't have a kid, which is so unfair. I wasn't going to let him guilt trip me anymore. "Jake," I said, trying to stay calm, "I feel bad for them too, but this isn't my responsibility. This is my mom's money. It's not something I'm just going to give away." He didn't say anything after that, but I could tell he was still mad. The tension in the house was just getting worse. He was barely talking to me, and when we did talk, it always ended with him making some snide comment about how lucky we were to not have fertility issues. It was like he was trying to wear me down, hoping I'd cave in if he kept pushing. Then, one night, I overheard him on the phone with his mom. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I walked by the room and I heard him say, "Yeah, she's still being stubborn about it. I don't know what her problem is." That really hurt. Stubborn? My problem? It was like he was painting me as this selfish person who was just holding on to the money for no reason. And the worst part is, he was telling his family about it, making me sound like the villain. I felt so betrayed. I thought we were supposed to be a team, but instead, he was turning this into some kind of campaign against me. After he got off the phone, I confronted him. "Were you seriously just talking to your mom about this?" I asked, trying not to sound as mad as I was. He looked at me like he didn't see what the big deal was. "Yeah, I told her what's going on. She thinks you're being unreasonable too." Unreasonable? That was it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jake, this isn't her business. This is between us, and I already made my decision." He sighed like he was so frustrated with me, like I was the one making things difficult. "I just don't get why you're so against helping them. It's not like you need the money, and they can't have kids without it." I could feel my blood boiling at this point. I didn't want to fight, but I couldn't just sit there and let him keep guilt-tripping me. "It's not about needing the money," I said, my voice shaking a little from anger. "It's about what this money means. My mom just died, Jake. This is all I have left of her. I'm not going to spend it on something I don't feel right about, especially when it's for your family." That shut him up for a minute, but then he said something that really hit me. "We're getting married, though. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Shouldn't we make decisions together?" That's when it hit me. He didn't see this as my money at all. He saw it as our money, like he had a right to decide how it should be spent just because we were engaged. That scared me, honestly. It made me realize that maybe we weren't on the same page about more than just this money. I didn't know what to say, so I just told him, "We're not married yet, and this money was left to me. I need you to respect that." Jake just stared at me for a second, like he didn't know what to say either, and then he stormed out of the room. He didn't come back for a couple of hours, and when he didn't say anything. He just acted like everything was fine, but I could tell he was still mad. That's when I started to feel like I was losing him. Like this money, this one thing, was coming between us in a way I never expected. I wanted to talk it out, to fix it, but every time I tried, he'd just shut down or say something passive-aggressive about his family. It was like he didn't care how I felt at all. I was left sitting there, wondering if this was just about the money or if it was about something bigger. Was this how things were going to be every time we disagreed on something? Was he always going to try and push me until I gave in? I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that things were getting worse, and I had no idea how to fix it. So things between me and Jake weren't getting better after that argument. Actually, they were getting worse. The more I stuck to my decision about the money, the more distant he became. And it wasn't just the distance that bothered me, it was the way he acted. Like, every conversation we had turned into something about how I wasn't thinking about our future, or how selfish I was being for not helping his family. I was trying my best to just let things cool down, but Jake didn't seem interested in that. Instead, he kept throwing little digs at me, almost like he was waiting for me to break and say, "Okay, fine, take the money." But that wasn't happening. I felt like I was being backed into a corner, and I didn't like it at all. Then, one night, after another silent dinner, Jake finally decided to really bring it up again. Except this time, it wasn't just about his brother and IVF. It was about us. He sat across from me at the table, just staring for a bit before he finally said, "I don't get why you're being so stubborn about this. If you loved me, you'd want to help my family. You'd want to make things easier for them." That hit me hard. I mean, I do love Jake, but love isn't just about giving in to whatever the other person wants, right? Especially when it comes to something as personal as this. But before I could even respond, he kept going. "We're supposed to be building a future together, but it feels like you're not even considering what I want. You're making this all about you and your feelings, like I don't even matter." Now I was getting really mad. Like, I had been trying so hard to be patient, to not escalate things, but hearing him say that, it felt so unfair. It felt like he was completely ignoring the fact that I had lost my mom, and that this wasn't just some random chunk of money. It was the last thing she left me, and he was acting like that didn't mean anything. "I am thinking about us," I said, trying to stay calm. "But this money isn't about you or your brother. It's about my mom, and I need to figure out what to do with it in my own time. I'm not saying I'll never help them, but right now, I just can't." But Jake wasn't having it. He shook his head, looking more frustrated than ever. "I don't understand why it's such a big deal. It's not like you're using the money for anything, it's just sitting there, and they need it now. We're a team, but it doesn't feel like it." That's when it clicked for me. Jake wasn't upset about his brother needing help. I mean, sure, he cared about that, but what he was really upset about was control. He wanted control over the money, over what I did with it, and he couldn't stand that I wasn't just going along with his plan. "I'm not going to spend the money just because you want me to," I finally said, feeling the anger boiling up inside me. "I'm not your bank. This is my decision, and I need you to respect that." Jake didn't say anything for a minute, just sat there staring at me like he couldn't believe what I was saying. Then he stood up, pushed his chair back, and walked out of the room. I didn't follow him this time. I couldn't. I needed space too, because I was starting to question everything about our relationship. Over the next few days, things were tense. Jake barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was always short, passive-aggressive comments about me being stubborn or not thinking about our future. It was exhausting. I was walking on eggshells around him, trying to avoid more fights, but it seemed like everything I did just pissed him off more. Then, out of nowhere, he dropped a bomb on me. We were sitting in the living room, barely talking, when he suddenly turned to me and said, "If you're not willing to help my family, maybe we need to rethink this whole marriage thing." I was stunned. Like, I didn't even know what to say at first. Was he seriously threatening to call off our engagement because I wouldn't pay for his brother's IVF? That felt like emotional blackmail, and it hit me like a punch in the gut. All this time I thought we were just having a disagreement, something we could work through. But now it felt like he was willing to throw everything away over this. "Are you serious?" I asked, staring at him. "You're going to end things because I won't give your brother my mom's money?" Jake shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "I'm just saying, if we can't even agree on something this important, maybe we're not right for each other." That was it. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about how Jake saw me and our relationship. To him, me not giving in was the same as me not loving him. And if he couldn't respect my decision now, what was going to happen later on when we disagreed about other things? Was he always going to threaten to leave if I didn't do what he wanted? I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, trying to process everything. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever before Jake finally stood up and walked out of the room again. He didn't say anything else, just left me sitting there, wondering what the hell had just happened. For the next few days, I felt like I was living in a stranger's house. Jake and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was like we were tiptoeing around each other. I wanted to talk, to figure out what was really going on, but every time I tried to bring it up, he'd shut me down or change the subject. It was like he didn't want to deal with it anymore, like he was waiting for me to come around and give in. But I wasn't going to. I knew that much. I couldn't let him pressure me into doing something I didn't feel right about, no matter how much I loved him. And that's when I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, Jake wasn't the person I thought he was. Maybe this whole thing was showing me something I didn't want to see. So, things kept getting worse after that last conversation. Jake wasn't backing down, and I wasn't either. We were barely speaking, and when we did, it was just awkward small talk, like two people who didn't really know each other anymore. Every now and then, he'd make some passive-aggressive comment about our future, or how he couldn't believe I was letting money get between us. It was exhausting, and honestly, I didn't know how much longer I could take it. Then one evening, out of nowhere, Jake sat me down like he was about to deliver some huge speech. I braced myself, thinking maybe he was finally going to apologize or try to have a real conversation about where we were headed. But instead, he hit me with something else. "Look," he said, staring right at me. "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I still don't understand why you're being so stubborn about the money. We're supposed to be partners, right? And partners make sacrifices for each other." I could feel my face getting hot. I couldn't believe we were still having this same conversation. I thought we'd moved past this, but apparently he hadn't. "Jake, I've told you a million times. This is my mom's money. It's not something I'm just going to give away because you want me to. I need you to respect that." He didn't even flinch. It was like nothing I said was getting through to him. "But it's not like you're using it for anything, right? It's just sitting there. And my brother and Sarah, this is their only chance to have a baby. Why can't you just help them out? It wouldn't change your life at all, but it would change theirs forever." I couldn't believe he was still framing it like that, like my life and my feelings didn't matter. "It's not just about the money," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "This is about you not listening to me, about you not respecting how I feel. You've been pressuring me for weeks, and I'm tired of it." Jake crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "I'm not pressuring you. I'm trying to get you to see reason." That was it. I snapped. "See reason?" I practically yelled. "Jake, I've been reasonable this whole time. You're the one who keeps pushing and pushing, like my opinion doesn't matter at all. I've told you from the beginning how I feel about this, and instead of listening, you've spent every day making me feel like the bad guy for not giving in to what you want." His face hardened. "So you're just never going to help them? Is that what you're saying?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "I'm saying I need time to figure out what I want to do with my mom's inheritance. And right now, I don't feel right about giving it away for IVF. I've been clear about that." For a second, he didn't say anything, just stared at me like he couldn't believe what I was saying. Then he stood up and said, "Well, I guess this tells me everything I need to know." I felt a pit forming in my stomach. "What does that mean?" He shrugged, acting like he didn't care as much as I knew he did. "It means that you don't care about building a future with me. You're only thinking about yourself." That hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe he was turning this around on me, like I was the one being selfish. I'd spent weeks trying to be patient, trying to explain my feelings, and now he was making it sound like I didn't care about our relationship at all. "That's not fair," I said quietly, my voice shaking a little. "I love you, Jake. But this isn't just about money. It's about respect, and I don't feel like you're respecting me right now." He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, looking at me like he didn't recognize me. Then he finally said, "Maybe we're just not as compatible as we thought." I didn't know what to say to that. I felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. I'd always thought we were solid, that we'd get through this rough patch and come out stronger. But now I was starting to wonder if we were even on the same page anymore. Maybe we never had been. "I think I need some space," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked at me surprised. "What does that mean?" "It means I need time to think," I said, standing up and heading toward the bedroom. "I can't keep doing this, Jake. We keep going in circles, and it's not getting us anywhere. I just need some time to figure things out." I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away, but he didn't follow. He just let me go. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. How had we gotten here? A few months ago, everything had felt perfect. We were planning our wedding, talking about starting a family of our own. And now, it felt like everything was falling apart. I knew part of it was the grief. Losing my mom had left this huge, gaping hole in my life, and maybe I hadn't been dealing with it as well as I thought I was. But still, that didn't excuse the way Jake had been treating me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, respect, and the way he seemed to think he had a right to make decisions for me. I thought about calling a friend, but I didn't even know what to say. How do you explain to someone that the person you thought you'd spend the rest of your life with is turning into a stranger right before your eyes? The next few days were rough. I tried to avoid Jake as much as possible, and he seemed content to do the same. We were like two ghosts living in the same house, barely acknowledging each other. I spent most of my time in the bedroom thinking, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I needed to talk to Jake, to have a real conversation about where we were headed, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was scared, honestly. Scared that the moment we sat down and talked, everything would come crashing down. But I also knew I couldn't keep living in this weird limbo forever. Something had to give. We couldn't keep pretending like this was normal, like everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. And deep down, I knew that whatever happened next, things were never going to be the same between us again. A few days later, I hit my breaking point. I couldn't take the tension in the house anymore. Jake and I were barely talking, and every time we did, it felt like we were just tiptoeing around each other. It was exhausting, and I was so tired of feeling like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. I needed to have a real conversation with him, even though I knew it wasn't going to be easy. So one evening, after another awkward, silent dinner, I told Jake we needed to talk. He looked at me with this kind of blank expression, like he wasn't sure if he was ready for what I was about to say. But I couldn't keep pretending like things were fine. We couldn't just keep avoiding the issue. "We can't keep doing this, Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to figure out what's going on here because I can't keep living like this. This isn't how I want our relationship to be." He sighed, leaning back in his chair like he was bracing himself. "I don't know what you want me to say. You've made it pretty clear that you're not going to help my brother, and honestly, it feels like you don't care about my family at all." There it was again, the same accusation that had been hanging in the air for weeks. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's not that I don't care about your family, Jake. I do care, but this money isn't just money to me. It's tied to my mom, and I'm not ready to make decisions about it right now. I've been trying to explain that to you, but you're not listening." He rubbed his hands over his face, clearly frustrated. "I am listening. I've been listening. But from where I'm sitting, it just seems like you don't trust me enough to make decisions together. Like, if we're going to be married, shouldn't we be a team? Shouldn't we be able to make these kinds of decisions together?" I couldn't believe he was still framing it like that. It wasn't about trust or being a team. It was about the fact that he was trying to pressure me into doing something I wasn't comfortable with. And every time I said no, he acted like I was the bad guy. I get that, but this isn't about not trusting you. It's about me needing time to grieve and figure things out for myself. You keep saying we're a team, but it doesn't feel like that when you keep pushing me to do something I've already said I don't want to do. Jake shook his head. "I just don't understand why it's such a big deal. It's not like you're using the money for anything right now. It's just sitting there, and Mark and Sarah need help. They're family. Shouldn't that matter?" I felt a lump forming in my throat. I didn't want to cry, but the frustration was getting to me. "It does matter, Jake, but so do my feelings. And right now, it feels like you're not even considering them. You've been pressuring me for weeks, and I'm starting to feel like you don't care about what I'm going through." That seemed to catch him off guard. He sat there for a moment, staring at the floor, like he didn't know what to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "It's just hard for me to see them struggle, you know? They've been trying for so long, and I thought maybe we could help them. I thought maybe it would bring us closer." Hearing him say that kind of softened something inside me. I understood where he was coming from, at least a little bit. He loved his brother and wanted to help him, but at the same time, that didn't make it okay for him to pressure me the way he had been. "I get that, Jake," I said, my voice softening too. "I really do. But this is hard for me too. My mom's gone, and this money is all I have left of her. I'm not ready to give that away yet. I need you to understand that." He nodded slowly like he was finally starting to get it. "I didn't mean to make you feel like I don't care about your feelings. I guess I don't know. I got caught up in trying to fix things for Mark and Sarah, and I wasn't thinking about how much this is affecting you." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we were finally getting somewhere. Maybe we could actually work through this. But then Jake said something that brought everything crashing back down. "But I still think we need to figure this out," he said, looking at me seriously. "Because I don't know if I can be with someone who won't help my family when they need it." That hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe he was still making this about me not helping his family, like that was the deciding factor in whether or not we stayed together. It felt like everything we'd just talked about didn't matter. He was still holding on to this idea that if I didn't give in, then I didn't care about him or his family. I stared at him, my heart sinking. "So that's it? If I don't give them the money, we're done?" Jake didn't answer right away. He just sat there looking conflicted, like he didn't want to say it but also didn't want to lie. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I don't know, but I do know that this is a big deal to me, and if we can't agree on something like this, I don't know how we're supposed to move forward." I felt like I was suffocating. This was it. This was the moment where everything came crashing down. I had tried so hard to be patient, to explain my feelings, to make him understand. But in the end, it still came down to this. If I didn't give in, we were over. I stood up, feeling like my legs were going to give out underneath me. I need to think, I said, my voice shaky. I can't do this right now. Jake didn't try to stop me as I walked away. He just sat there watching me go. And in that moment, I knew that things were never going to be the same. Whether we stayed together or not, this had changed everything. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, and all I could think about was how unfair this all felt. How had we gotten here? How had something as personal as my mom's inheritance turned into this huge issue that was threatening to tear us apart? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run back out there and beg Jake to stay, to tell him I'd do whatever he wanted just to keep us together. But another part of me knew that wasn't right. I couldn't give in just to make him happy. I couldn't let him control this, because if I did, I'd lose a part of myself in the process. And that was something I wasn't willing to do. I sat in the bedroom for what felt like hours, just staring at the wall, trying to make sense of everything. My mind was racing, going back and forth between all the conversations Jake and I had over the last few weeks. The guilt, the pressure, the way he kept twisting things to make it seem like I was the one being unreasonable. It was starting to feel like he was someone I didn't even recognize anymore. I kept thinking about the way he'd said, "I don't know if we can move forward if you don't help my family." That sentence just kept playing over and over in my head, like a broken record. How had we even gotten to this point? How had my relationship turned into some weird test about whether or not I'd give away my mom's inheritance? At some point, I realized I couldn't stay in that room forever. I had to face him, even though I didn't know what I was going to say. My heart was pounding as I walked back out into the living room, where Jake was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone like nothing had happened. "Jake," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He looked up, surprised that I was speaking to him again so soon. "I need to understand something." He put his phone down and gave me his full attention. "What?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "Do you really think that if I don't give your brother and Sarah the money, that's it for us? Like, we're done?" He blinked, not expecting me to go there so directly, but he didn't avoid it. I don't know how we can move forward if we can't agree on something this important." That was the moment I felt something inside me shift. I was hoping he'd backtrack, maybe apologize for how much pressure he'd been putting on me. But no, he was doubling down again, making it clear that in his mind, this was non-negotiable. "So, that's it then?" I asked, my voice getting a little louder now, the frustration finally boiling over. "You're willing to throw away everything we've built together because I won't give up my mom's money?" He didn't answer right away. He just sat there staring at me like he was trying to figure out the right thing to say. But that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. The silence said it all. "I can't believe this," I said, my voice cracking. "I can't believe you're putting me in this position." Jake stood up, looking frustrated now too. "I'm not putting you in any position. I'm just saying, no, you are putting me in a position." I cut him off, feeling the anger building in my chest. "You're asking me to choose between you and something that's deeply personal to me. Something that has to do with my mom. And you don't even seem to care how hard this is for me." I could see the look on his face, like he was struggling to respond, but I didn't let him. I was too far gone now. "You've made this entire thing about you and what you want, and you haven't stopped for a second to think about what this means to me. And now you're standing here, acting like I'm the one ruining our relationship because I won't bend to what you want." Jake opened his mouth to say something, but I wasn't finished. "I need to know," I said, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to ask. "If I don't give them the money, are we over? Is that what this is really about?" The room went completely silent. He just stood there, staring at me, and I could tell from the look on his face that he didn't know how to answer. Or maybe he did, but he didn't want to say it out loud. And that silence was the loudest answer I could have gotten,